Why did you help me in the bar that night?
What was I supposed to do? I had to get involved.
You were happy for the excuse.
Trust me, I know.
Hi, welcome everyone. This is episode 57 of the Comics in Motion show. I am Chris Phelps, and my good friend and co-host is Mr. Dave Horrocks.
Hi, Chris, and hello to our listeners out there. Welcome to the Comics in Motion. What we like to do here is we like to review media like movies and TV shows that are based on comic books. Myself, I'll be reviewing from the perspective of a long-time comic book reader.
And I'll be reviewing from the TV and film perspective.
And what we also like to do is we also like to spoil the hell out of everything we review. So if you haven't watched our choice of the week, then we'd advise you to proceed with caution. And what we also love is when you can head over to Apple Podcasts or your podcast catcher of choice and drop us a 5-star review. This really helps us to grow the show and gets us out there to other listeners. And later in the episode, we're going to have a very special guest on as well. So Professor Heather Ness, who's also got the podcast Super Psych, which is all about the psychology of superheroes. So Heather's going to come on and speak to us a little about that, and we'll ask some questions about what she thinks about our particular choice of the week as well. Now, Chris, there's been lots and lots of speculation and discussion over the last, well, seems like forever, a few years, about Ben Affleck and his role in the DC EU, is it, the extended universe, and what part would he have to play? And it looks like the curtain's finally been officially drawn on his time as Batman.
Yeah, it has, Dave. And to be fair, reading a lot of the comments on social media this week, because obviously it was a trending topic on Twitter, and obviously there was stuff on Facebook as well on some of the groups that we're in. A lot of people were disappointed, saying like he's one of the closest portrayals of Batman ever. Now, me personally, as much as I absolutely, as you know, I love the Christopher Nolan trilogy and Christian Bale, is for me with Ben Affleck, it's don't let the door hit you on the back of the head, son. You've had a go. I just was never convinced that he was a Batman. So I'm happy that there's a change. I'm not sure what they're going to do because they're allegedly going backwards, aren't they? Where he's younger. So whether it's another origin story, I don't know whether can you tell a story any better than what Christopher Nolan has, and does people out there really want to see it other than ourselves, who are obviously, you know, comic book fans and superhero movie fans? I just don't get it. I don't get what you're going to do with the character, but you know I'm going to be there day one, Dave, watching it. So either way, I'm intrigued to see where he goes with this one, definitely.
Well, as much of a comic book movie and comic nut I am, I have to say, I do not need to see Batman's origin again. I just don't need to see it. So show me something a little bit different. Now, it's interesting. I thought you didn't mind old Ben Affleck's portrayal. I kind of liked it. So he plays that older, more grizzled Batman, you know. So, and I think the fact that he has bulked up, you know, and he's he's a big frame bloke anyway, isn't he? Yeah. And he obviously bulks up for the role, and I think he really brings that kind of Dark Knight. So the old Frank Miller Dark Knight kind of older Batman. I think he's done a pretty good job. And what I thought on reflection when the news broke yesterday was he's not even had his own movie yet. Yeah. He's been in all these different movies as Batman, you know, Justice League, cameoed in Suicide Squad and what have you. And it just seems weird that he hasn't had his own movie. Now, this speculation has been going because originally he was supposed to direct it, wasn't he? And as well as star in it. And then I think it was a few years ago, was it 2017, when he stepped aside and then Matt Reeves was named. So Matt Reeves has done things like Cloverfield, Let Me In, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. So he'd stepped aside as the director, but it was still kind of like, well, he's probably going to be the Batman going forward. But I'm a little bit disappointed that I haven't got to see, you know, that older Frank Miller type portrayal with Ben Affleck doing it. But, you know, it is what it is. So we're looking on for someone new now. I've seen lots and lots of names bandied about. I think was it John Hamm, the guy from Mad Men? Quite a few people have mentioned him on Twitter, I saw. So let's just see. I think one thing that Matt Reeves did say is that they're probably going to focus more on Batman the detective. So we haven't really, of all the different movies, it's mainly focused on the action pieces. There's a little bit in Batman 1989, isn't there, where he has to figure out the combination of all the various hair care and body. What was it called? Body. I want to say body odor products, but that's not what they call it.
It's like moisturizer, like a when he created
moisturizer, but deodorant and all that sort of stuff. He has to figure out what that is. I think focusing on him as a detective, I think is something a bit newer. So let's see what they produce. But I mean, the big news as well was that they've actually got a release date now. So it's 2021. So it feels like it's a long way away now. We've got a lot of comic book movies and TV shows to get through before we get there. But at least they're kind of putting a stake in the ground and saying, "Yep, it's going to be there."
Well, I think as well, Dave, very good point and description and an argument on Ben Affleck. I have no problem with that. I think hand on heart, I was never convinced by him, but I also think he was let down by some bad writing. And I also think in the Justice League, they made Batman look so weak again with all the other characters. Superman just nailed him when he come back to life. Then at the end, when they were fighting Steppenwolf, he's there with his little zapper, and he is like a sort of peripheral figure. Now, all right, he hasn't got superpowers, and he's a billionaire who's absolutely tech heavy, and that's what Batman is. But either way, Batman and Superman have always been the strongest characters in the DC universe for one reason or another. I know, like I said, the superhero thing. So I was quite disappointed in what they did with him. And it's all been set up for Superman being the stronger character, which obviously is alien sort of thing with these powers. But I can buy that, and I agree with you. I would have probably liked to have seen him in a movie of his own, but I think that movie should have come first before he had all these cameos, because you were trying to build a character of Batman on the backdrop of other films, and I just feel that he deserved his own film first, and then I might be sat here going he was as good as Christian Bale, but because it was always a team-up type film, I just was never invested in him.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to hear me sing the praises of any of those movies, to be honest. But I thought he did well with what he was given. But he was just an enabler, wasn't he? He was just a necessary evil to get that story to go along. So let's see what I did. Sorry, I cut you off there, Chris.
No, sorry, Dave. What I was going to say was what's going to be interesting with this, and we could also ruin what's going on, is they've obviously, is there going to be a crossover with this Joker origin film? Will the new Batman be in that to introduce him in? Will, as it's been announced, the Suicide Squad 2021 with 2020 with James Gunn, is that going to be a precursor? Are we going to see maybe Affleck do his last bit of Batman, or maybe not? They might even mention him. But I'm really interested, because you could literally have 2 or 3 different universes there, all with telling the same story, like the Joker. We might even have 2 or 3 different Jokers by the time that Batman film comes out. So I just don't get. Someone's got to draw a line somewhere and go, we either go with Jared Leto, good or bad, we go with Joaquin Phoenix, or we go with a completely new thing. And once these 2 films are out the way, Suicide Squad and the Joker, this is the new, Batman universe, because it's going to be confusing for the fan on the street who's not sure what's going on. He's just like, he just goes to watch a film, or he or she, or just what I mean. Like the origins more than I do, but even I know it's hard to follow the story, I think, more than anything, because you go one year and there's one Joker, you go the next, there's another one. It's a weird way they've done it.
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed before, haven't we, that, one of my big frustrations with all of the DC properties is they use the same characters and then they cast different actors for like the TV and the movies. And it just, they seem to they seem to want to have this wider universe, this extended universe, but they can't be bothered to make it actually work and feel like one.
Yeah.
And so I just, one of the points of discussion again with the whole Batman thing breaking this week is, I think DC, I say DC, it's really Warner Brothers, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are probably going to focus more on the individual stories, so individual films, and not worry too much about the big team up films. So I guess, it's only a logical learning, really, isn't it? Because they did such a horrible job, in my humble opinion. I know some people are still clambering for the Snyder Cut, I know, but, for me, it just didn't work. And yet their most successful, both critically and commercially, movies seem to be the individual ones. So, Aquaman being the most recent example. So I think they're going to focus more on the individual movies. But I think if you do that, great, but don't use the same characters.
Yeah.
You've got this world of characters. And I know it might come across like, being a Marvel fanboy, but Marvel Studios, when it kicked up, didn't have any of their A-listers. They didn't have Spider-Man, they didn't have the X-Men, they didn't have the Fantastic Four. So they had to work with other characters. And now, when I say A-listers, I mean in terms of just the public consciousness, do we know about all these people? And yet now everyone knows who Iron Man is, Captain America. So I think just use different characters. If you're going to keep recasting actors, it's just going to create confusion. And quite honestly, the comics are very convoluted and confusing a lot of the time. And at the minute, Warner Brothers are doing a good job of replicating that confusion.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you on that, Dave. I honestly think that it's something that's as a fan, it's completely unnecessary for me. I don't get it. I don't understand why you would want to do that when you've got Marvel just hitting it out the park, Dave. I mean, I was skeptical with Infinity War, with all these characters from different films that were always successful on their own right. I don't think any of the Marvel properties have tested anything less than, say, a 7 out of 10. And that's just me spitballing as we're talking, because obviously we go through the movie background. But there's been no real duds on that side. And when you watch their individual films, they slowly started introducing characters, didn't they? We had Iron Man, the origin stuff, and we reviewed it a few episodes ago, and it was purely Iron Man, Spider-Man, but then Spider-Man gets Iron Man in, doesn't he? And then Thor gets the Hulk for Ragnarok, so there was always that thing. And I think Captain America was the one where really it was pretty much the Avengers, wasn't it? Was it Captain America's A Civil War, where it was basically, they were all there, weren't they? Spider-Man and Iron Man. There was only the Hulk, and there was only a couple of them missing. So it's pretty much it's a great film, don't get me wrong, fantastic film. But I just think Marvel do it good enough that the origin is still being told, whereas DC don't seem to have any formula or idea really. They're trying to copy Marvel, but then they sort of think, oh, hang on, we need to go our own direction, so we're not copying. But I just think sometimes if it's not broke, then don't try and fix it. Just copy them. People lap it up. There's a reason. I know Aquaman has been absolutely fantastic, and like I said, we said it broke $1 billion, Dave, and he reckons it's going to hit $1.5 billion within the next month. It's just unbelievable juggernaut, and so that has been like the best DC film ever now, without a doubt. But that was pretty much like a Marvel type film, Dave, wasn't it? It was quite different. It wasn't a dark, dull tone that you're used to with like the Man of Steel, and even the Nolan stuff was because that was so well written and directed. They got away with it, but it's quite a dark. And Batman is like that, isn't he? It's all the underworld and in dingy corners of Gotham and stuff. But I think they could expand. I mean, Shazam might be a complete success, Dave. That could be something completely different. I don't know.
I am looking forward to that one, to be fair.
Yeah.
And that looks, so the biggest difference with, I would say Wonder Woman as well. So Wonder Woman and Aquaman, had a bit of fun in them.
Yeah.
Shazam definitely looks like it's going to be a bit of fun as well. So yeah, just give us a bit of that, and I think, a discussion for a different day maybe, but I wonder if that Nolan trilogy has had a wider impact, so Batman is all, like you say, it's all dark and dingy. And then I just wonder if, because of that success, you know, again, critically and commercially, everyone at Warner Bros. is like, yeah, great, let's make all of our superheroes dark and dingy like that. And it's set them on that path.
Yeah, I think you're right. And also one thing with the Man of Steel, which obviously I enjoyed, and I know you didn't, was the original idea with that was for actually to have Christian Bale come across and have a little cameo in Man of Steel, and Henry Cavill was supposed to be having some sort of involvement in The Dark Knight Rises, but it didn't happen. Christian Bale he got rid of the cowl, he was gone. So there was a crossover there with Zack Snyder and that, but that didn't happen. So maybe that's why this thing never because you've gone from, you know, this absolutely amazing film in the Dark Knight trilogy to the Man of Steel, and they were quite polar opposites, weren't they? They tried a certain direction, but I enjoyed it, but it wasn't the same as the Nolan trilogy by any stretch of the imagination. So, Dave, carrying on from what we were talking about with Batman, within the same universe, and we have to talk about this because she's not only one of my favourite actresses, also one of my favourite characters ever in a film. And it's the teaser for Birds of Prey with good old Harley Quinn, Margot Robbie. So what do you think of what we've seen so far, Dave?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because so first of all, you know, it's got Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn in it. I'm going to watch it. Hands down. Forget the podcast. You know, I will be there and I'll be watching it. But it's not, you know, some teaser trailers show you almost nothing, do they? This is a bit of a different one that I can't recall I've ever seen something like this for a comic book movie, where it's almost like a screen test. You know, where they've got all the characters all dressed up and, you know, just acting a bit in character and just showing us literally for a few seconds all these different characters that we're going to see. And so, yeah, I think it looks like it's going to be quite interesting. I mean, I don't know if they're going to keep that long title. What is it? The Emancipation of Harley Quinn, or it was something ridiculous like that, wasn't it? So hopefully it's just Birds of Prey, rolls off the tongue a little bit more.
But I would say, though, Dave, sorry to cut across you wouldn't think Birds of Prey would be in the comic book superhero world, would you, as a title?
I mean, it is, but so why do you say that?
No, I mean, for me, someone who isn't a comic book reader, has no knowledge. If I saw someone said to me, we're going to watch Birds of Prey, I'm going to be like, oh, what the heck's this all about? It's like a load of blackbirds killing somebody, like a Hitchcock type film. What's it about? You know, I know it sounds really dramatic, but that's exactly what I thought. I know what it's about. I know the character and everything, and we've talked about it in the podcast. But for someone from the outside, you're not initially going to go, great film, let's go and watch that. It's about Harley Quinn. Do you understand what I mean? I know the marketing.
Yeah.
The marketing's going to help that anyway. A title's a title of a film, but it's just, for me, it's a very odd name, I think, personally.
Yeah, and you know what? It hadn't even occurred to me because, like I say, I know from the comics and just didn't think. But yeah, taking a step back, who is going to know? If you're not into the comics, then you are relying on, you know, watching the trailer, you know, presumably the proper trailer when it comes out to even recognize it as a comic book movie.
Yeah, but that's just, I know it's just nitpicking. It's just something that stands out quite, you know, I think it should just be like a Harley Quinn or something, you know, just something obvious sometimes. The obvious stuff's the better stuff, isn't it? So,
well, I mean, let's see if it has any impact at all. I'm sure if they invest in the marketing, they get enough trailers out there, then people will start to know of it. Again, rewind back a few years now. Who'd heard of Guardians of the Galaxy?
Yeah.
I think, you know, even comic book readers, not that many people were reading Guardians of the Galaxy, quite honestly. And there were various incarnations of the team. So it's not like, you know, the Justice League or something like that, where you've got core characters. So, yeah, but it's interesting whether the naming of it has any impact to the people who are going to turn up and watch it. Yeah.
And Dave, it's just me spitballing, talking out loud. It might mean absolutely nothing near the time, because like we said,
generally do talk out loud, don't you?
said that before, haven't I?
It's like when I say to my kids, I'm like, stop chewing with your mouth full. And now I always say it now, like unconsciously, and the kids always pick me up on it. It's like, oh, get to your room.
Brilliant. I mean, I suppose today, though, Dave, as well, talking about Birds of Prey, and we've mentioned Batman and the Suicide Squad. This is the start again, I suppose, of a little DCEU revival, isn't it? Because Birds of Prey is going to lead into the Suicide Squad sequel, obviously, one way or the other. So I'll be quite interesting to see what they do with it. And like you say, I'll be there day one. It's not even up for arguments. Even if I've got to sit there on my own, I've got to watch that film. But no,
yeah.
are really good.
So again, we've talked about this in the previous section there, but again, they've got another character, Black Canary, that is now recast. It's a different actress that's going to be in this, and we had a Black Canary in Arrow,
right?
And so again, it's just taking different actors, and I guess this is probably the real nerd in me talking, but it's just so frustrating. And it's like, just picking away at a scab, since I've ever thought of it, stop swapping actors. If you're going to claim to have this extended universe, have it, and make it feel like a universe. But again, like I say, they've got a new actress in there. Yeah. So not going to stop me from watching it, but it does just grate on me a bit, if I'm honest.
So, Dave, it's that time of the show again. I think we need some nice comic book background, and if you could tell all the listeners what we're actually reviewing this week.
Yep. So, Punisher Season 2 dropped recently on Netflix, and so we're going to review the first half of that. So, we're going to be going through episodes 1 through to 6, which brings us to approximately the halfway point, and so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, in terms of comic background, Jerry Conway was writing Spider-Man way back in the mid-70s and came up with the idea of a character that was inspired by the Executioner book, which was quite popular at the time, written by Don Pendleton. And in there, his character was a Vietnam vet who basically becomes a serial killer of criminals after the mafia basically obliterated his family there. So very similar to the Punisher, and just lifted that idea from, I guess, prose and then just took it into the comics world. Now, Conway was working with John Romita Sr. So in terms of the creators for Punisher, or Frank Castle's Punisher, it's generally credited to Jerry Conway and John Romita Sr. But Jerry Conway used to do his own sketches. He was the writer, but used to do his own little sketches. And he actually came up with that initial character design. And he sketched a little small skull on his chest. And John Romita Sr. saw it and he was like, yeah, that looks really cool, but we're going to have to make it a whole lot bigger. And so that's when he blew it up, and essentially it takes up, especially in the early drawings, it takes up his whole chest and really dominates. And I found out essentially the story goes that's to draw away fire. So, if you see that in the dark, you're going to aim for the skull.
Ah, right.
So there is a functional thing. I'm sure they weren't thinking that, but that got placed into canon a few years later. Now, Spider-Man penciler at the time was a guy called Ross Andrew, and so he's also sometimes credited as the creator because he was the first artist to draw Punisher in a comic book. So that particular comic book was Amazing Spider-Man 129, published in 1974, a fairly iconic. Now, at that time, because there is a fourth person who you could say could be part of that creative team. Now, who, Chris, again in Marvel, would be rushing to take a little bit of credit for creating a character the mid-70s?
It's not Mr. Cameo himself, is it, Mr. Lee?
It certainly is. So, again, though, he at that time, he was editor-in-chief. And so essentially Jerry Conway's boss. So I guess what he says goes at the time. But Jerry Conway wanted to call him the assassin, but he wanted Punisher to be to appear as a villain, but then become redeemable and be a kind of anti-hero later. And so Stan Lee said, well, if he's called the assassin, you can't really have a comic book a hero that's called the Assassin. It's just too negative. Remember when we were talking about the League of Shadows, when they did that in they renamed the League of Assassins in Batman Begins, and it's just, if they go and call themselves, when they initially try and recruit Bruce, they call themselves the League of Assassins. It just sounds sinister, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So there's nothing too redeemable. So I think, essentially it was a good choice. And Stan basically had a peripheral character that he'd written ages ago called the Punisher. And so he suggested, to call the character the Punisher. And Jerry, saying like we all do a lot of the time, yes, boss, that's a great idea. Let's go with that. So now, to be fair, old Stanley, again, he's not really considered to be one of the creators, but let's face it, it's a pretty big deal, isn't it? To give him that name. So the four people I would say who were in that creative team, you got Jerry Conway, John Romita Sr., Ross Andrew, and good old Stanley.
Stan's everywhere, Dave.
He is. He's got his fingers in every pie, so to speak. Now, Chris, do you want to tell us about the series background?
Yes, Dave. Well, a month after Series 1 came out in December 2017, Netflix straight away commissioned Series 2. They started filming around January 2018, and then by August 2018, they'd wrapped it all up. John Berthnall again came back as Frank Castle, and Ben Barnes reprised his role as Billy Russo. Now, one of the things with this one was it received mixed reviews, the first series, which from a personal point of view, I'm on the fence about because I really enjoyed it. But, it is what it is. Now, Lightfoot, who's the actual director and series runner, he actually decided they were going to go one way with Frank's character. They wanted a bit of a softer start to this new series. So what they did was with the costumes and that, they felt that he needed to tone it back. So he went down the route of the jeans, the tops, the t-shirt. There was no combat stuff, so to say, which he wore in the first series. Now, one thing they wanted to do, they wanted to tell a story of allegedly, Frank's got the new name, which he's given from the FBI, and he's traveling around the country that he served, seeing the country. So it's supposed to be a bit like the old Incredible Hulk series, Dave, like a bit of a wanderer type situation. So they took some things from that. Now, John Berthnall was quite adamant how he wanted the character to go, and how if there's going to be the introduction of the skull and outfit, it has to be something that is built up over the series. Now, obviously, going off the first series, there was a couple of episodes there where they were telling the backstory of Frank and where he come from and the situation he had with Billy, because obviously Billy ended up being the main sort of bad guy in the first series. Now, this series, it concentrates a lot on Billy's face and the fact that they don't actually name him in the first 6 episodes, Jigsaw, but they did want to they do allude to it. Now, Russo, or Ben Barnes, who plays him, decided to shave his hair, give himself more of a New York accent, a bit rougher and ready. But he also took, which I think is really good, and I can see where he's got it from, he took a lot of inspiration from Vincent D'Onofrio's portrayal of Wilson Fisk in the first series of Daredevil, where there's that vulnerability of, is he still, is he good, is he bad? Mm-hmm. And that's where he wanted him to have that vulnerability of the sort of, there's still a man of principle in there, but because he's had brain injuries and his face is scarred and he's having a lot of psychological problems, it's all that built-up thing, which I can see the parallels to the first season of Daredevil, because we did say that when we reviewed it, that what was interesting with Daredevil Series 1 was the fact that there was actually a full origin story with Wilson Fisk, wasn't there? There was a couple of episodes there where it was mainly about him, and I think what they've done in these first 6 episodes that we've actually watched is very interesting. I'm not saying they're nicking the idea, but also Daredevil's so successful, why would you not take a few key points there that work, Dave? So I think that's a really good bit of acting, really, from him, and and he's not been afraid to actually say that he's gone out on himself. Now, critically, which I find this is really baffled me, Dave, I'll be honest with you, I want your thoughts on this. On Rotten Tomatoes, it's only 52% approval rating with an average user rating of 6.5 out of 10. That's based off 25 reviews. On Metacritic, it's exactly the same. It's at 58% out of 100. Now, and what I find interesting with the review scores, Dave, is like what we talked about with Glass, is I just don't know what they're watching. I'm not going to ruin what we're going to review, but it's shown a lot of the times, Venom as well. But again, the critics, the review stars on Netflix are 4.5 out of 5. So I just find it really bizarre that it's been scored so badly. But we are only 6 episodes in, so I'll reserve judgment on that when we actually review the rest of the series. So I could be completely wrong there, Dave.
I think this might be a bit too much for a lot of people.
Yes.
In terms of the violence. So, if you're a reviewer and you've grown up on Christopher Reeve's Superman, and, that's how you judge comic book characters, and then you get to something like Punisher, which, to be honest, and I may talk about this a little bit next week, when I do a different comic book background, but, there are some, what I would say, are hyper-violent comics around the Punisher. I mean, let's face it, he is not, sometimes he's cast as the villain, and it depends on the story. Sometimes he's the anti-hero, sometimes he's the villain. But, he takes no prisoners, does he? And, I just think, especially this series, going into, and we'll go deeper into it, but I just think some reviewers might be watching this and just think, oh, you know what, they've taken it too far. I don't like this.
Yeah, and I take that point completely on board, and I think you probably could be right with that, Dave. But again, everyone's tastes are different, aren't they? I think if you go into this thinking we're just going to get someone throwing a few, batarangs around or whatever at somebody, or we're just going to get a bit of Superman lifting a car up and saving the day, then you're severely mistaken with this. I mean, this is actually, from what we've watched so far, it's at another level to the Daredevil, and the Daredevil's pretty gruesome. This is on a whole different level.
Yeah, absolutely. I
think that's a great point, actually, Dave, you just said there.
As we mentioned before, we've got Professor Heather Ness of the Super Site podcast joining us. So welcome to the show, Heather.
Hey, it's good to be here.
So do you want to tell us all about your podcast and what is it you actually do over there?
So I do a bunch of different things. I started doing the blog on Tumblr a while ago, where I would just watch different movies or different animated movies cast, and that one kind of took a different focus, where instead of doing like a whole movie, I look at a specific character, and usually that it's grounded more in the comics. So I got everything over there on superpsych.com. I started doing the podcast, and then I got interested in going to conventions. So now I go to different panels, and that'll be on anything from like superheroes to video games to anime. And so I do that, and then I actually, I was writing all of these blog posts, and I was like, at this point, I just, why don't I just write a book? So I wrote a book, and it's called Broken Heroes, and it's on Amazon. And that's actually over the first season of the 4 Marvel Defenders. So Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist. And with that, I just go episode by episode for the first season for all of them. So that's what I'm doing. And I'm also, going to school to get my doctorate in educational psychology.
That's great, that, Heather. And thank you again for coming on. Great start to the show. Now, obviously, we're going to review The Punisher. From your point of view, from your background and a psychology professor, what do you think of Frank as a person, as a character? Is there any parallels to real life that you can sort of take from this mad psychopath, I suppose? But
Is
it PC? Can we say that?
What?
This mad psychopath. I'm not sure, but yeah. What was your perspective on Frank?
So, with my perspective on Frank, and that kind of got started, a lot of kind of like what influenced how I think of Frank is from the second season of Daredevil. Because there's a lot of talk about whether or not he has PTSD. And from the comics, you can really make a case that he has the PTSD. But then in the second season of Daredevil kind of goes off in a different direction from the comics. And it's implied or shown that Frank actually had some sort of traumatic brain injury. So I'm a little liable to think that, God, it's kind of hard because he's a Marine. And so a lot of this stuff has been trained into him. You know, when he's fighting someone, it's almost just like reflexes. But I think a little bit of the I kind of want to say lack of impulse control that might be rooted from the traumatic brain injury. I wonder how he acted more on missions prior to all of this. Yeah,
so I think you're right. I mean, they held up the iconic kind of X-rays, didn't they? Which looked a little bit like the Punisher skull. But yeah, I think, and you're absolutely right. So definitely from the comics, it was more that traumatic event. But certainly from the Garth Ennis stuff, you know, the Welcome Back Frank and the Max series, it's definitely more about that traumatic experience. And then, you know, he just relentlessly, you know, goes off on a revenge mission and never really stops.
And part of it, like, you know, maybe it's PTSD, maybe it's traumatic brain injury or whatever. But part of it, I think, just has to do with, like, Frank's ideology and just view of the world. You know, everything was fine and dandy with his family. But then his eyes are kind of opened up into, like, you know, people that he trusted are actually bad people. And he learned from the Marine, this is what we do with what we're calling bad people.
Yeah, I think as well, I think it's alluded to, and we'll get into that obviously in the review in a second, is it's very much, he actually enjoys the chaos, the nastiness, that on the edge of doing so. I think it's a character fault as well, that he just absolutely loves the violence of it all. He feels at home. And I think that's alluded to quite a lot in this, where, you know, he's mentioned that he puts himself in situations he knows that the only way to get out of it is by absolutely maiming and killing everybody. And I think you're right, the PTSD stuff does play a part, and it's obviously something in 2019 that's quite common with a lot of ex-army veterans and stuff. That's totally something that people talk about now, whereas years ago it wasn't, and it was a bit of frustration. But also I do think, in my opinion, it's a character flaw in him as well.
Yeah. And then, like, it's just, my personal opinion is that someone could very easily develop PTSD just by going to Marine boot camp. Like, it's that serious. People who go into it, like, I don't want to paint them in a bad way because obviously they're serving my country, but, you know, what they have to go through is so intense. And the whole Marine training is to basically, like, wash away your identity. You're just this Marine. You're part of this Corps. And here's what you do in these situations, and you don't ask questions. So part of it could be Frank's character. Part of it could be, this is what he did for so many years, and this is now what feels natural to him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost robotic programming, really, I suppose, and repetition. And I think, I don't know about yourself over in the US, but I know a lot of my friends who are in the army or who are in the army, and one thing they do is, because they're so regimented and told to act a certain way, and, you know, obviously the killing machines, let's not, you know, be around the bush, they are killing machines. It's the fact that they genuinely, when they get free time, they just go crazy. You know, they drink, they go absolutely mental. And I think sometimes that's something that gets overlooked, because it's one extreme to the other, isn't it? You're a war soldier, someone who's ready to go into battle against an enemy, and you are correct. It doesn't necessarily mean they are the bad guys and we're the good guys. But yeah, it's a very interesting portrayal of his character. I don't know the comic background. Heather, Dave is someone who's read, you know, a lot of the comics. I don't really know Frank's origins other than what I've seen in the Netflix series and stuff I've seen and read years ago, but nothing where I know anything about him.
So can I ask a different question? Obviously, we're an entertainment podcast, so I don't want to go off and get too deep. But I think, you know, PTSD is something that, you know, everyone knows the acronym. Everyone knows vaguely kind of what the symptoms are. And as Chris said, you know, years gone by, you can, you know, you hear stories from the various world conflicts that have gone on, and you think, oh, well, actually, you know, that behavior there is some kind of PTSD involved there. But for someone who's, say, been across in a foreign land fighting, it's obviously very traumatic, and they come back, they're diagnosed with PTSD. Is that something that affects them for life? Is that something they can really come back from? I realize this is something we could disappear off in a rabbit hole about, but just, I mean, what is it really, other than what I think my basic layman's understanding of it is?
Yeah, so basically, to not get like off into like a psychology lecture on you guys, but we have, our brain has different mechanisms set up that we're supposed to be able to deal with anxiety, just everyday anxiety. People go through trauma all the time, but in like a super traumatic event, all of those mechanisms, the way I explain it to students is basically it's like a rubber band that's been overstretched. And so once you overstretch it, it's really hard to get it back into shape. So the things that are affected are the parts of your brain that deal with emotions and parts of the brain that deal with memory. So those things are just overstretched. And so that leads to, soldiers coming home and they're just, they just have this lack of emotion on their face. They're not being expressionless on one end of the spectrum, and the other end of the spectrum, they're just, they'll fly off at the drop of a hat. Something will trigger them, or they have like these extreme memories of the trauma. But then something that we don't really talk about with PTSD, they have difficulty making new memories sometimes. So it is hard to come back from. They can go to therapy, they can have whatever kind of treatment to deal with it. But since, parts of their brain are literally affected, it's a hard thing to come back from, and they'll be dealing with it for a long time.
That's really interesting, again, because, I mean, where the character is in the TV show and in the comics, really, he's certainly, he's at a point where he doesn't look like he's ever going to drift back. And so, it's really interesting that you say that, because you do sort of wonder, after his initial, avenging his family's murder, you'd have thought, well, could he, if this was real life, would he not just settle back into the person that he was? But I guess from what you're saying there, he actually wouldn't.
So, see, with Frank in the Netflix series, I'm not so sure that he has PTSD. I think he's just really pissed off and he's grieving over his family, like a really deep grieving. But I don't want to launch this into the review too soon. But like in episode 1, I kind of was thinking maybe he could go back to, he could start building a new life.
It definitely looked that way, and we'll go into a bit more depth in when we talk about that one. So that's really interesting. So thanks a lot for that, Heather. I think get yourself over to Super Psych Podcast. Some of the, I mean, I've binged them all, to be quite honest, but some of the highlights that I really liked, the Miles Morales one, the show that you did there, I thought was really interesting. Obviously, the animated movie that we did, it came out just before Christmas, Into the Spider-Verse, was fantastic, and I think it'll help people understand a bit more about Miles as a character. Rorschach is one of my absolute favorites. Again, a bit an interesting one to dissect, and also Jason Todd. Now we're going to be looking at Titans in a couple of weeks, so an interesting one there. So again, loads of others. There's Deadpool in there, there's Harley Quinn, so a really interesting listen. So get yourself across and give that a listen. I think it's about time we went into our review. Are you ready, Heather?
I'm ready. Let's do this.
Let's go. Are you ready, Dave?
Let's go. Okay, so we start off in episode 1, and I have to say this gave me a real vibe of the old 70s Hulk TV show. And it's interesting, you mentioned in the series background, Chris, that I guess that was an intentional thing. And Heather, you also mentioned that, Frank did look like he possibly could come back from where he was in series 1, but I thought they don't really explore this, or I haven't seen it much in the comics where they explore this side of Frank. But I thought it was great. We've got Frank in a bar. He's chilling out, having a few beers, watching a band. And he actually, John Bernthal, I don't think even in Walking Dead I saw him smile that much. But, you know, it was interesting to see him smile without cracking his face there.
You know what's kind of funny? I love that you bring up the 70s Hulk TV show. But you guys know the theme song, the intro for The Punisher?
Uh-huh.
It's very much, and I think this was intentional. I never read anything about it. But it's very much like this one song by Johnny Cash.
Oh, okay.
And so he's, you know, then we get Frank in this bar, and it's very like 70s country. And then the person who's playing in the bar, I don't know how familiar you guys are with American country, but the guy playing in the bar is Shooter Jennings, who is the son of Waylon Jennings, who was like best friends with, or really close with Johnny Cash. So you just have like all of this intentional reminiscent of like 70s American country, having a good time, the everyday man. And that seems to be like Frank's element, because like you said, this is the first time that he's smiling and enjoying himself.
That's an awesome callback there, because I have to say, I assume we know pretty much the square root of nothing about country music. So if you imagine, so Chris and I, originally we first met, we were in a band, but our musical tastes probably lie a little bit elsewhere. And so if we ever ended up in that situation, kind of think of the Blues Brothers, we'd be very quickly trying to rustle up a bit of Rawhide and essentially play that all night.
Well, actually, Dave, you actually are correct on yourself, but not on me, because Mr. Waylon Jennings, I have on my Apple song list and Spotify song list, because
no way.
Oh yeah, because Mr. Waylon Jennings sang the theme song to Dukes of Hazzard, the Good Old Boys, and he also sang Are You Sure Hank Done It This Way, Dave, which was actually, as a gamer, the theme song for Trevor out of Grand Theft Auto 5. So I've actually got into Waylon Jennings through the back door, and a lot of people actually rate Waylon Jennings as one of the best country singers ever. He's a big influence on a lot of people. So I actually know who he is. So there you go, Dave. So there,
very good, very good.
And he's a legend in country music, that guy.
So
when Heather said it, I was thinking, it's Waylon Jennings' his son. I knew straight away who it was.
So I think the only other one I probably know, I probably know a few, you know, old Dolly Parton songs and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
A bit of Achy Breaky Heart by Billy Ray Cyrus. Maybe I could call back that one, but yeah, I assume the cup runneth pretty dry when it comes to me, at least. But Chris, you're obviously the guru over there.
No, I'm not the guru. I do like a bit of country music. I love, you know, well, we both like America, don't we, Dave? But I don't mind some of the country music. I'm not Garth Brooks type level, though, Heather. No.
Yeah.
That's not happening. But yeah, I love a bit of Waylon. He's the man.
So you like country and Western?
Now, Dave, we will be going into Rawhide if you carry on.
But that's funny too, because like you guys watched Logan.
Yeah.
And that was very much like a Western movie. And I was commenting that like the first season of The Punisher is really good, but it's not really my thing, because I don't like war movies, like World War I, World War II movies. They're just not my thing. But The Punisher season 2 is very much like a Western. It feels like Logan. And I think a lot of that was really purposeful.
That's a good spot. That I didn't even think of that, to be fair, Heather. That's honestly, and me and Dave absolutely. We haven't actually reviewed it every day, but we both personally loved Logan. I absolutely love Wolverine. So, and Dave is the same. So yeah, that's what we need to review at some point. I didn't say that comparison, but now you've said it, I get that completely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, of course, you know, it is the Punisher, though. So as much as I found it heartwarming to see him chilling out and having a bit of a good time at the bar, but you can still tell that he's hard as nails, because when you get this guy, he's obviously being a little bit of a tool and trying to pick up the barmaid and being overstepping his boundaries somewhat. Frank steps in there, doesn't he, and just lets the guy know who's boss.
Oh yeah, big time. And obviously we get Frank back to his best, if we're being honest, Dave. A bit of a slap, a bit of a, don't mess with me, son. And, the bouncer steps in, doesn't he, and sort of fields this sort of guy away. And the bouncer's unsure of Frank because he don't know who he is, does he? And he's not going by the name of Frank at this point either, is he? Because he's under his new alias.
So he's Pete Castiglione. It's easy for me to say, isn't it? Pete Castiglione. I'll put it that way. So originally in the comics, his name was Francis Castiglione, and I guess you over the years you probably had a lot of Italians sort of changing their name, going across, and you had even the great Stan Lee was Stanley Lieber, wasn't he? And he ended up changing his name. So. Yeah, but they've changed it a little bit here, so he's Pete, and the bouncer's a big bloke, isn't he?
Oh yeah.
And he was just tired. He wanted to eat his meal.
Yeah, I've never really seen that before. You don't tend to get that with the bouncers over here, but I don't know if that's normal, that you just have the bouncer sort of chilling out, eating at the end of the bar, and then just stepping in when he has to.
I don't know if I've ever seen a bouncer in that type of bar before.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
that for me was weird.
I never saw Patrick Swayze in Roadhouse doing that. Anyway, he was always on point, ready to go, Dalton. So yeah,
Roadhouse.
Roadhouse. Hey, I love that film. So don't.
Oh yeah,
I love Roadhouse.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Love it. But yeah, but again. We're getting this thing with Frank, wherever he goes, he's got a moral point to everything he does, isn't there? There is something there. He doesn't just react for reacting's sake. And I think this is where you can see he's not really gone into detail. I agree with you, Dave. It's not like it's a couple of episodes of him doing the old, I'm not going to fight. There was an old Bruce Lee film called The Big Boss from years ago. And I know it was overdubbed like mad, but he had this chain on where it was like, I can't fight. I'm not fighting anymore, even though he's this like killing machine. And then someone kicked his chain off and he went all, the old, whoa, and he went psycho and kicked everyone about. Even with the actions, but he went psycho and took everyone out. And that's with Frank. He didn't really, I would have liked them, to be fair, to giving it a bit more of him trying to walk away from conflict. He literally don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely loving all the violence, but he just literally went straight into it. It was as if they'd given him half an hour to change his character. And he thought, forget this, let's just go all in. And he just went straight on it, didn't he?
Well, I'm not sure I didn't look at the timer, actually. It seemed to go on for a little bit because, after this slight altercation and he shows the tool who's boss, the barmaid takes a bit of a shine to him. And again, they have, he goes back to her place and they have this slightly uncomfortable, I thought, dialogue, but they end up spending the night and, Frank's on his way out and, he meets the barmaid, Beth. He meets her son, and then they end up going out to breakfast. And all of this thing, I'm sure it must have been, it felt like it was about 20 minutes or so. And I thought it was really good. And again, for me, this was where you're like, yeah, he's not just a one-dimensional person who just has a bloodlust to go out there and have revenge. At this point, he is trying to have what looks like a normal life. And then, again, I thought it was a little bit strange, after having this bond, because he gives up his actual name, doesn't he? At first he says, I'm Pete, but then he says he's Frank. But then he does drive off, and I'm sure he says he was like 2 hours down the road or something, but then ends up driving back to the bar to see her that night.
Yeah, I think one of the characteristics of Frank that kind of gets glossed over because of all of the violence, but he's a family man. He likes having his wife and kids in the house and the picket fence, and he had that. but that's what he wants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, brilliant point. I think, and again, I thought, it was a real warmth between him and Beth's son. I thought, he wasn't just, oh, this is all rather inconvenient. He did genuinely seem to have a bond there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he did. And you get this, like you say, you get the lull. And then the next section is a case of Frank notices that there's a lot of suspicious people at the bar, doesn't he, as he goes back there. And he goes into full-on reconnaissance army, surveillance on these guys. He knows straight away, even by the way they're walking and the reaction, the way they've sort of centered around everybody within the bar, that something's going to happen. And I've got to say, this, and I love the Daredevil, Heather. I don't know about yourself, myself and Dave, especially me. It's one of my personal favorite series. Even though the second one was slightly different, as you mentioned, but all three of them have a place in my heart, really. But this violence that we see pretty much in this scene is something that even supersedes the Daredevil, and that they're not afraid to use a bit of blood and gore. Now, this is just absolute carnage that's going on here. It's almost like a horror film, really, a slasher horror film or something, the way it went. It just went absolutely to 100.
Yeah, there were a few moments where, and I watched all the Daredevil and I love them too. And, most of the time the violence doesn't really shock me or anything because, I've seen it. But there were a few times in these 6 episodes where I was like, oh man, there goes that guy's half of his face.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, a standout point in this episode again is the good old bouncer who is having his meal, then gets I've never seen something so graphic. He gets absolutely stabbed to pieces, doesn't he? It's absolutely brutal, and he's a big hulk of a bloke, isn't he? And in the end, it just gets too much for him and he just gets absolutely taken out. But that is so graphic and it was almost realistic, the way the stabbing happened. It wasn't like in the films where it's like they grab each other and stuff like that. It genuinely was proper gruesome. I don't know what you felt, Dave.
Yeah, I think, we sometimes poke a little bit of fun, honestly, Heather, at Iron Fist and some of the fight choreography and that. But I think if you take that as being almost acrobatic and then Daredevil a little bit more boxing style and a bit more street fighting style, well, Punisher just goes even more street. It is proper, you can imagine it being military combat training, and Frank, he takes a fair bit of punishment as well, doesn't he? He doesn't duck out of many things, so he takes quite a few good hits, and he just seems to have a high tolerance for pain.
Yeah, when the enemy comes at him, he doesn't back down from it, and part of that had to have been some of his training. Yeah,
without a doubt, and again, I thought this was a strong episode. He meets the young girl, doesn't he, who's getting terrorized by him, and he's trying to protect her. And I think he does a cracking bit as well when he's had the fight in the toilet with these sort of special ops people. Is he pushes her in the middle of everyone in the bar on purpose as bait. And she doesn't see it, but he does, and he circles them, doesn't he? And then just absolutely just starts nailing everyone, shooting, stabbing, just everything. All bets are off. But it was such a risky thing to do, but so clever of the Punisher character. And then it's something I became to know in the first series that Frank, once that switch goes, that's it. He's gone completely, and he's not going to stop until he's killed everyone.
Yeah, I have to say, I do love that. Playing up that training, that side of the character. You think about your classic kind of superhero. A lot of the time that let's take Spider-Man. He's bitten by a radioactive spider, but he was just in high school. So he has to figure out how to be a superhero. Well, Frank's got no actual superpowers, but all of his training, is what makes him super. And it's a really good point. He's protecting her by throwing her in the middle of the crowd as such. And I have to say, there's something that grates on me a little bit, and that's more to do with me than the actor and this series. But I always think of the Punisher as being from New York. And, you know, obviously New York's got a fairly distinctive accent there. And John Bernthal is absolutely, he's never going to convince anyone that he's from New York. And even, you know, being across in the UK, you can recognize the different regional accents. And just with him having that more of a Southern accent there, it just occasionally it just takes me out a bit. But one of the things that he does is that, like, it's almost like a gorilla grunt, you know, when he's taken out a load of these guys, but he's still got, you know, a few more to take down, and the adrenaline's absolutely kicked in there. I can't think of a specific example where he's done it somewhere else, but I'm sure I've seen it somewhere else where he just gives out that, oh, you know, just absolutely brilliant.
You know, Chris, you were saying about like how that switch goes. I noticed that like his voice does change between, like, you know, he's at the bar talking with Beth, still, you know, not the New York accent like you're saying, and kind of like, you know, the deep tough guy voice. But then when that switch goes, it is more the grunts, and just kind of like almost a different voice.
Mm-hmm. It's an aggressive voice, in a deep. I was actually going to do an impression, but I'm not. After, you know, I'm not going to do it. But
it's not quite Batman, is it? You do a decent Batman.
I do a decent Batman. He would have ended up actually being Christian Bale again, actually, Heather. So I won't go down that route. But yeah, I was that for me and Dave actually WhatsApped each other. You know, as we both watched it pretty close together, and that was the first thing we both said was the grunt. That's just stood out for me more than anything. A primal instinct, and someone who just basically just gone back, you know, generations and generations and evolution. But that absolute, and that's what you see with, you know, obviously primates and monkeys and gorillas. That's how they communicate. But what made me laugh is the guy who he did it to, he just turned straight round as if to say, "Oh, it's on again, then let's go." You know, and I just thought it was brilliant directing. And I know it sounds daft because he's not speaking dialogue, but the writing and the storytelling in that was fantastic.
Oh yeah,
really good.
Yeah, and so, you know, he ends up he saved the girl, hasn't he? Beth takes a shot, unfortunately. So, and you know what? It was driving me crazy because I thought, I know who that actress is, but I just can't think, where do I know her from? And I was checking IMDB, and it didn't have her up at the time. And it's Alexa Davalos from Man in High Castle. I don't know if you guys have seen that at all.
No.
No? All right. Okay. So you probably didn't. I'd seen a few. I've not watched all of it, but I've seen a fair few episodes. But I just couldn't place her at all. But yeah, so she takes a shot, and so Frank, you know, puts her and the young girl who he just knows that, you know, these people are after. He doesn't know why. He goes to take Beth off to the hospital, and then he gets surrounded by a couple of cars. And then, you know, it's at this point when you're thinking, right, yep, old Frank's definitely back. That switch has happened. He's no longer trying to chill out. And when he takes, you know, I'm not sure if it's an Uzi or what type of gun it is, he just absolutely decimates the people in the cars, you know, that have surrounded him either side.
Yeah. I mean, it's just Frank in it 101. That's it. He's just a machine, absolute machine. And he doesn't even think or pause. That's what I liked about it. He didn't go, oh, hang on a minute. Why are these? He knows what they're there for. But, you know, like sometimes you need a bit of dialogue with this. He's like, nah, forget that. Bang, there you go. See ya. And then he reverses backwards, doesn't he? So, yeah, it's a great fight scene, a great chase as well. And I think it just set me up really for this whole episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we move on from this first episode, we did kind of get hinted, you know, we had a few other characters. So we saw that the girl, she was calling this chap about, you know, selling photos and what have you. And we had this guy, this man in black. He's obviously killed this Russian gangster. Again, at this point, we don't know what's kind of going on there. And at the very end of the episode, we get to meet Billy Russo again, don't we? So he's obviously in hospital. He's got his little mask there that's got some drawings on the front of it and what have you. So it's just really hinted at. You know, we were pretty sure at the end of series 1 that Billy Russo would be back. He's the kind of Joker to to Batman, if you like. The Punisher doesn't have a lot of reoccurring nemesis because he dispatches them all pretty much. But yeah, so we get hinted at he's got a couple of adversaries there that he's going to run into. So anything else on that first episode, guys?
No, I'm good.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So I guess for me, it started off slow. We'd had some really nice moments there, but the second half of that first episode, it really got my adrenaline up, and I was like, yep, here we go. I'm looking forward to this now. Yeah.
I mean, we're going into the second episode. Now, I've got a couple of slight problems with this, guys. If you could just forgive me on this, is why in these TV shows or films, if anyone who works as a doctor, and this, please forgive me on this, Heather, before I go down this rabbit hole, because you're probably going to say, Chris, what you're talking about, but why is he that sort of doctor, psychiatrist? Why do they always have some sort of demons or some sort of something wrong with them? Do you know what I mean? Like, we get introduced to the psychologist with Billy, don't we? There's a lot of talk and dialogue between Billy and I knew straight away. I thought this girl is going to have demons and something going on straight away. I don't know whether you guys picked up on that, whether it's sort of fatigue from watching all these things and knowing how this works. But straight away I thought she's going to be either an ally or she's going to be an absolute maniac herself. And you get a couple of things with her. I don't know, please give your opinion on this, what you think, whether it's just me.
I have so many problems with Dr. Dumont. She just...
Go for it, Heather. Go for it.
She does great on me. And I'm like, it gets worse after episode 2. In episode 2, I'm like, oh God, you're full of yourself, aren't you? Like, I thought like the savior complex.
Yes.
Like, there's got to be something back there because now she has to save Billy, and she starts talking about all of these different theories, and I'm like, man, that's kind of helpful. But like, he could probably be using some other kind of technique or something. And then just later on in other episodes, I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I don't know about you, Dave. I totally agree, Heather.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a few ethics problems that I've got there with how she goes about things. And like you say, it gets worse as we get into these 6 episodes. But even like straight off the bat, there was something that just didn't seem quite right. There was something slightly off with her, wasn't there?
Yeah, and I get it, and I get for the plot why she's there, but I'm going to criticize this episode or her character. I'm with Heather on this. Is she seemed like it was just so cliche and absolute. You just knew, as I said before, you just knew what was coming with this lady, what she was going to do, and there was going to be an alliance with Billy. And I don't know, I felt like I'd seen it before. Billy's character, like Dave, I think you hit the nail on the head very well with what you said about him. He was very much like the Joker, that sort of troubled person. I know this, the brutality, but that's what I felt like I was watching, as if someone was analysing the Joker. I don't know. It just didn't seem very convincing for me.
I think I started to have a little bit of a problem with something different, but kind of related as well. So I don't know if it's just because I'm a bit scarred by, and it became such a cliche, didn't it? With like the old kind of 70s and 80s kind of American TV soaps to have the amnesia. And it became so like a reoccurring thing. And doesn't Joey from Friends, doesn't his character have amnesia or something? I can't remember, but just for Billy to have amnesia like that, I was just like, I'm not sure I like this.
What about yourself, Heather?
Yeah, it is a little frustrating because you just want the plot to go forward, and with his amnesia, it does kind of stall it.
Yeah.
Now he just got to figure out like what happened, what got me here, and all this stuff. And you want the conflict between Billy and Frank to just go forward.
I think one thing I've mentioned before, and I've spoke to Dave about this, we've never reviewed the first series of The Punisher. is that I didn't like the fact that in series 2 of the Daredevil, Frank was this all-conquering, absolute one-man army, no personality, no emotion, no nothing other than when he spoke with Karen Page. He was pretty much the killing machine, the Punisher. And I had a problem with the first series where we had a lull of about 8 episodes in. We had about 2 or 3 episodes that were unnecessary, trying to build Frank up as this sort of nice person, really. When before it, maybe 20 episodes, including the Daredevil series 2, he's basically not took any conscience of what he's done and just decimated about 50 or 60 people and killed them all. And I had a real problem with that. I felt that the Punisher series 1 should have been before Daredevil series 2. And it led on to the fact that he tried to be a good guy, and then his basic primal instincts kicked in, and he just went full on Punisher. And that's how he should have come into Daredevil series 2. But it always sits a bit strange with me, the timelines of this, because this is always after the Daredevil stuff and his relationship with Karen, which I've just find a bit hard, really, to swallow. Just for me personally, anyway.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I'd agree as well. I think it would flow better, quite honestly. You know, if you think about a person's growth and, you know, where they've gone, where they've come from and where they are right now, I think it probably would. But it's different writers, isn't it? And so, you know, Punisher was an enabler, you know, and I thought there was some really good interactions actually between him and Daredevil, and again, it's done in the comics as well, because they both, you know, they're both vigilantes, but you know, Daredevil doesn't kill anyone, and Frank's like, why not? They just keep coming back.
On one hand, though, too, like with the Daredevil season, like you're not necessarily seeing things through Matt's eyes, but everything's kind of tainted with his perspective. So maybe with that, it's like, well, this is how Matt sees Frank Castle, and it's just, you know, no conscious killing machine. And then you get Frank in his own series, and he's like, yeah, I am a good guy. There's reasons behind all of these things. Yeah,
that actually makes perfect sense, to be fair. I just think it's not portrayed very well on the screen. They sort of built him up into this all-conquering, you know, he fights Wilson Fisk, doesn't he, in jail, and we get that scene is one of the best scenes I've ever seen for pure choreography violence, and how he fights him. You wouldn't think that was the same guy a couple of episodes later in The Punisher, or the next series of The Punisher, when he sat with Karen on a bench near Brooklyn Bridge or something, just chatting away, you know. So I know you are right, but what you just said makes more sense than I think sometimes how it's portrayed on the screen.
Yeah, there is a big break, and it does feel a little weird.
Yeah.
I think this is definitely a slower episode, isn't it? In some respects. I mean, we do get a bit of action. So, I mean, we start off with, obviously, we have the interactions between the Doctor and Billy. We get Madani, you know, so she's back. She'd been shot by Billy in series 1, and she's a little bit obsessed. You know, she goes and visits Billy every day. She thinks he's having everyone on. He hasn't got amnesia at all. And so obviously we haven't gone ahead into the second half of the series. So I'm saying I'm a bit frustrated by the amnesia. Who knows? Madani may be right, and he's just having everyone on. So Frank, he ends up taking the young girl into the motel, doesn't he, and ties her to the bed. Again, they don't seem to be. There's no one sort of looking suspiciously and ringing the police or anything, but essentially he's using her for bait. And at this time she says, you know, her name's Rachel, but she's not coming across as a particularly trustworthy character at this point. But the gang who we'd met and Frank had an altercation with in the first episode tracked them to the motel, and again Frank takes a few names there, doesn't he?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Again, pure violence, pure Punisher 101 for me.
And he essentially takes out all of these different gang members, with the exception of one girl. But before there's a kind of final showdown there, they end up getting arrested by the police.
Yeah.
Now, again, so I think a lot of this episode, a lot of quiet moments, a lot of violence with the altercation between Frank and the gang. Anything else jump out at you around series episode 2?
Yeah, no, not really. Except that we see that that guy who's all in black, and he's getting more interesting.
He is. We just get little snippets of him, don't we? And again, I don't know if this is from the comic books. There was a character called the Holy, who's a fairly obsessive religious nut, if I can say that. I'm not sure if he's kind of based on him, but he definitely gets more interested in the third episode, doesn't he? Because we focus a little bit more on him. We can see he's got a couple of boys. He's got a sick wife that he seems to be caring for, and basically he seems to be the hitman or something for a wealthy couple, and he gets sent off on these various missions. But you also see, which I thought was fairly sinister, he's got his shirt off, and you see he's obviously got a lot of right-wing tattoos that look like, have been removed, but you can still see the remnants of them.
Just in the overall in the different 6 episodes, as much as Frank is like conservative, I guess, and violent and pro-military, they take a lot of jabs at some of the alt-rights, right-wing stuff that's going on in America right now, and they really do not hold back, and they don't with this guy either.
Yeah, and I've got to say though, guys, I don't know about you, I was brought up as a Catholic Christian boy. Obviously, my name is Christian as well, but could they not have thought of a better name as John Pilgrim? They might as well just call him John Priest or something. It was so
I knew a John Priest.
But John Pilgrim, I'm thinking, come on, give us something. It was so. It's obviously a bit of a joke at some point, but yeah, what a name! It's so obvious. He wears a dog collar. I am John Pilgrim. All right, thanks a lot. You're a priest, are you? Yeah.
Could have made it a bit more comic booky. Could have called him Peter Pilgrim.
But yeah, I thought he was a good character, this guy. It very much, I don't know, have you guys ever seen Sons of Anarchy at all? Have you seen it?
No, I've not.
All right, well, have you seen it, Heather?
No.
Oh, right, okay. Well, there's a character in Sons of Anarchy. He comes in like each series. There's about 6 or 7 series, and he's about the 3rd series in. This John Pilgrim is very much like this character who comes into it. He comes into it and he's very righteous, and everything is like he's reading the Bible, but he's reading the Bible as he's, maiming people to death, and it's all like, pray for my sins and all this sort of thing. And this guy, even though he didn't look like him, he very, very much had the same tone and the way he had these sort of double standard morals of the way he is, like the cleanliness and the way he acted around people, when really he was just an absolute, he's a psychopath sort of thing.
Mm.
So
I got a slightly different vibe. Obviously, I haven't seen that, so I got no frame of reference there. But I was thinking more the Wolf from Pulp Fiction, because he was so cool. When essentially you've got Frank and you've got this girl who survived. Frank's taken out of all the gangs, so you got them two who are arrested and in this police this precinct, and the way he kind of walks up and he kind of has the conversation with the police officer about, essentially just give him over to us and you can walk away. You've got nothing in this, we'll let you go now. And, the policeman doesn't give it up, but he just always seems to be in control. And I just got that real kind of wolf vibe from him. And
calm.
Sorry, go ahead, Heather.
So it's just so calm, and he it's almost like he knows he's got to win. Yeah,
absolutely. And they shoot the police officer in the car, don't they? And gives the police officer a call and says, you need to get him to a hospital now. He's not just shot him to kill him. He shot him, and then right now you've got a timer. You got to do something.
Oh, that's great. I mean, I think now this next part of this episode, in the whole 6 episodes we're talking about, I thought this for me was one of my favourite parts. And it's basically like the gunfight at the OK Corral. It's, you know, Frank and Rachel at this point are in the police station, aren't they? And we've got these sort of small town cops who are trying to get information out of Rachel. Frank's in there. That girl henchwoman, she's in there as well in the other cell, which I thought that probably wouldn't happen in real life, that you'd have them so close and interacting. But we'll serve the plot because it's a little prison cell and they only had a couple of. It reminded me a bit, actually, we were talking about Waylon Jennings. It actually reminded me of the Dukes of Hazzard when they used to end up in prison, but somehow they could always get the keys off Roscoe or something. It felt like at any point someone was going to steal the keys off the copper and get out. But yeah, that was a bit of a stretch, but I love the standoff that we had because obviously John Pilgrim, Mr. Cliche, cliche name, he comes with his whole army and surrounds, doesn't he? We have a bit of a Russian standoff because the cops think they can win, and Frank knows that they can't. He knows who these people are and what they're capable of, and he's trying to say to him, "I need to get free. Let me get free." And they won't, will they? Because it very much feels like a superhero type situation in the film, a bit like a kryptonite thing with Superman, whereas he's got the kryptonite on him, he can't do anything, and he needs to be set free. Frank needs his hands and needs to be able to be set free. He needs a gun in his hand to be the Punisher. And I like the little build up in this episode at the end. I thought it was really, really strong.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like, you know, when it all starts to go south and Frank's like, have you got some black tape? And you're thinking, oh, what's he going to do with that? Well, all he did with it, he had a bandage on his arm, didn't he? And he just taped it up, you know, so you couldn't actually see him in the dark when he's up on the roof and taking out some of those armed men. And again, just a little bit, which just says to me, you know, he's always thinking, you know, about, you know, how do I get that advantage and you know, portraying all of that training that he's had. But I mean, essentially, you have this. What was the old film? Assault on Precinct 13 or something like that.
Yes, it is.
It's something like that, isn't it? So yeah. Again, it just gave me that years and years ago, but just gave me that kind of vibe. And you know, he takes out a load of these guys. You know, the police officers are pretty much in awe. You know, seeing him do this, and it's like, hang about, this guy has got. They couldn't find anything on him, you know, which is suspicious in itself, isn't it? You can see this guy has obviously got some skills there, but he hasn't even got a parking ticket on his record or anything. But essentially, right at the end there, you know, John does sneak up on Frank. So again, you know, this old John Pilgrim does seem like pretty even match for Frank. But we get, you know, Frank had called up Madani earlier, and essentially, you know, she turns up with a helicopter and essentially saves the day there. But for me, this felt like, you know, coming to the end of this 3rd episode, it felt like this was an arc in itself. You know, you could actually, that could have been a movie and that could have been the end.
I agree. What about yourself, Heather?
Yeah, I think you're right. Because like you were saying, it's like a Western, it's a shootout, you know, like there have been movies with this whole premise that they even say, I think one of the deputies says, you know, y'all ever seen that Western where this guy comes to town, turns out he's the devil or death or something. So you're right, this episode is like its own little Western movie where Frank saves the day once they set him loose.
One little point, and I agree, Heather, as well, and I think as well, one little point, the black tape dialogue. I actually thought that Frank was going full on John McClane when the Hans Gruber's there and he says he's got no gun, but really he's got his hands up here with a gun but taped behind his neck. I was waiting for the old tape with a gun there and he was going to pull it out on John Pilgrim's boys and take them all out. But obviously it was just merely for his plaster sort of thing. But yeah, no, I agree. And I think it was a good episode, this. It was a good episode. He finished with them all saying, didn't he, that Rachel asked where we're going and they all just say it once, don't they? New York, you know, that's it sort of thing.
Well, essentially, I think Madani, you know, she'd given off the vibes that she'd told Frank that, you know, she wasn't going to come and help him out when he'd asked for help earlier. But, you know, Billy Russo, he's escaped from hospitals, and, you know, again, Madani's fairly obsessed with him. Obviously, in series 1, they'd had a relationship, and he shot her in the head. So, you know, she's feeling fairly burned there. So yeah, they all have to head off to New York, but again, draws a nice little line under that first 3 episodes for me.
3 episodes we're going to talk about. Heather's unfortunately had to step off. She's got another business call, but she will be back for the end review, so stay tuned. And also, she will be back next week as well to finish off the whole season. So, Dave, we're now at episode 4. Do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, so in all of the episode titles, so we've not mentioned them all, but this one's called Scar Tissue, and it's very hard, isn't it, not to hum along with the Chili Peppers whenever you're thinking about Scar Tissue. But essentially, Madani, you know, everyone's reconvened back in New York, and Madani's hiding Frank and Rachel back at her apartment. She's absolutely convinced that Billy Russo's faking his amnesia, but Frank goes off to visit Curtis, who again had a pretty severe run-in with Billy back in season 1, and Curtis has seen him as well while he's been in hospital, and he's convinced that he's not faking it. He genuinely has got amnesia. Now, one of the things that I thought was just a bit too convenient for me, so, you know, Frank recalls that Billy's told him about one of his childhood caretakers abusing him. And, you know, we cut to a scene. So Billy's found this guy, this old bloke, you know, and he does, whoever the actor is, does a pretty good job of playing that seedy, creepy old bloke who you can imagine was fairly distasteful. But, you know, Frank just happening to remember this bloke, and Billy actually going to visit him was just all a bit convenient. And Madani, you know, and she's working with her police counterpart, Mahoney. It's difficult not to think of the police academy, isn't it, when you talk about a policeman called Mahoney? But this is a very different Mahoney.
Very good, Dave. Very good.
Bit of a reach going back there. So Madani goes. Yeah, Madani goes, and she finds this old caretaker's place, and Billy's already killed him off there. Mahoney creeps up behind her, and she shoots him square in the chest. And luckily, he's got a bulletproof vest on there to save him. So I've gone across quite a few bits there. So what jumped out at you about this bit, Chris?
I think it was more the origin of Rachel finding out why she's actually there, Dave, and find out a real name, and the fact that she discovers she knows what I've got to say with this whole series is, you know, I'm absolutely loving it. I love every time the Punisher's on screen. I love it. But I don't know about you, I was absolutely screaming at the screen. Just go on Google and find out if this guy is Pete. You know what I mean? Like, you literally could just put in anything, couldn't you? And you could pretty much find him. Do you know what I mean, David? I know it sounds stupid, but I was thinking, does nobody use the internet at all? Nobody see the news over the last 6-7 months of some guy who was absolutely decimated, and there was witch hunts, yeah. There was manhunts for him, wasn't there, Dave? In the first series,
yeah.
Across the cop car, and he had the hoodie up, and he was still alive. And I'm thinking, come on, have these guys just landed from space or something? I'm not seen at any of the social media stuff. You know, I know it's thinking sort of fourth dimensional, thinking outside the box, but at times I literally wanted to shake the screen and go, get on the, I was going to go mad and swear, but get on Google and do something. You know what I mean? I was so frustrated at times. I don't know about yourself, but.
Well, I think it did make me think, quite honestly. Now he's changed his name to Pete Castiglione.
Yep.
in a little bit of a Batman way, you know, in episode 1, he does give up his real name fairly easily. You know, so he does, it's not something he takes to the grave with him. But if you were to Google Pete Castiglione, you wouldn't get anywhere near Frank Castle, would you? And you know what it made me think? I've referred to it a couple of times now, but made me think to the old TV Hulk series where he used to call himself something different each time, but it was always something very similar to his original name.
Yeah.
So I don't know why, but the one I remember is like David Banyan. Come on. Of all the names in the world, you have to do something that sounds like David Banner, you know, and it's just, oh, come on. Yeah. But I agree. So I don't know if a Google would get you close to Frank Castle, but you know, if you had someone like that was on the news, I mean, he'd be on the FBI's most wanted list, wouldn't he? Surely, and he wouldn't drop out of the public consciousness quite so quickly.
No, I mean, look, Dave. You know, there's been in the UK, there's always people you remember, isn't there? You know, like notorious criminals for one thing or another. And you never forget who they are, Dave. You know, one of the ones which, you know, is an absolute travesty what he did, but a guy called Raoul Moat, and that was just nonsense. How the memes and stuff is absolutely ridiculous. What happened afterwards, but you never forget that face. You never forget who he is. Because of the social media. I mean, I'm not even talking about what he did or anything. It's not about that, but literally 5 or 6 years later, people still know who that person is. And that's not him. Fred West, for example, they're still making TV shows. You can't tell me that in a reality side world, they won't know who he is, who Frank Castle is. They won't know who Luke Cage is. You know, you know, the Daredevil keeps his identity secret, but you would, the social media aspect of it, even in the first series, was there for all to see. It was based on a computer program. I wanted that guy was the Big Brother as such, wasn't he? So it was a bit of a stretch that she'd not gone, hang on a minute, he looks familiar. You know what I mean? I don't know. He don't ruin it, but it was just something daft that just really bugged me when I was looking at thinking, these people, that's stupid.
Yeah, and again, they could get away with it in the Hulk, couldn't they? Because there was no internet, there was no real, there's no camera phones. So, you know, unless you had a bunch of reporters, and the only person who had a nose for it was do you remember old Jack McGee? Yeah. You know, he was always turning up, trying to find out, you know, stories, following these stories of the Hulk.
Yeah.
But yeah, so again, it's going to be tough, isn't it, for anything like this? I think any series, which is, you know, we're in series 2 now, but really it's his third appearance if you include Daredevil series 2 as well. So yeah, I think you just probably have to just park that one and just block that one out as being, this would never happen. You raise a really interesting point about Rachel, though, or should I say Amy, because, you know, she kind of gets, she discovers who Pete actually is. It's actually Frank. You know, she gets it from the look like an Apple store or something like that, doesn't it? Where she's pretending she's trying to buy a computer, and so she ends up. So she finds out a little bit more about who is this stranger who seems to, you know, obviously be well trained and seems to want to protect me and whatever. And she tells him her real name is Amy, and essentially she was part of a group of con artists in Chicago. They'd been paid by this Russian gangster to take a picture of a man kissing another man at a funeral. And after that job, you know, she'd gone out to get dinner for everyone and come back, and everyone's kind of been massacred. And that's when she'd been thrust into this kind of nightmare scenario. So we did actually find out quite a little bit more there.
Yeah, and also as the end of the episode comes out, you know, Billy's gone on a bit of a rampage, hasn't he? And he turns up at Dr. Demont's house now, doesn't he, covered in blood, and this sort of triangle that I alluded to, and this sort of interaction between them is complete. Basically, she's gone full on protector of evil, and that's how the episode finishes off.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what sane person actually opens the door to a person covered in blood like that and just, all right, are you okay? Come in. You like a cup of tea?
Yeah. What have you done there? Oh, come on then.
Yeah, have you grazed your knee? So, you'd be slamming the door shut and calling 911, wouldn't you? So, yeah. It's just, again, as you'd said earlier, there's something definitely not right with her.
As we go into One-Eyed Jacks, which is episode 5, I do think this episode as well has there's a strong scene in this, and it's a pure violence scene, isn't it, Dave? So Frank he sets up a meeting with the Russians, and they've alluded to that they're in a gym, classic cliche with sort of Turk had gone in there, Annie, to have a chat with them, and their boy had been taken out. So the next minute, they're strangling Turk, aren't they? But Frank's watching from across the street, and he then sets up this meeting with the Russians. Turk rings him and says, come on down, sort of thing, and I'm taking a risk with this, when actually the Russians have got him at gunpoint, haven't they? And Frank knows straight away. So he sets up a bit of a meeting, but he's never going to turn up. And what happens is the old classic thing where all the bad guys go to one place and Frank just walks in the front door of this gym with about 4 big henchmen and the main Russian gangster. And I've got to say, Dave, he's an imposing figure, Frank, but these guys were definitely on some vitamins, weren't they? They were huge. They eat
their vitamins and spinach, don't they?
My word. And the main guy who Frank sort of squares up to, who's got a bald head, he's actually an ex-UFC fighter called Keith Jardine. He's actually American, but obviously he's playing a Russian gangster stroke. Well, he actually fights the MMA, and that's what I like about this, like I mentioned with the Daredevil stuff as well.
Right.
He'd fought at light heavyweight for the UFC. He was actually a contender at one point, and he's done a lot of film work as well. He'd been on a lot of film sets since he retired, and he does a lot of the combat choreography for films and TV stuff, Dave. So he was just huge, and Frank was more than a match for Frank, wasn't he, Dave? He was a cracking fight.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that. I mean, like you say, John Bernthal, he's physically, he looks like he can handle himself, but he looked fairly small against, some of these other guys. And the one at the end, I've mentioned a couple of times that I think the violence might just be a bit too much for people. And when this guy, I mean, he's got the measure of Frank, hasn't he? And in a room with nothing else available, you would imagine he'd put Frank down. But then he proceeds to, he makes use of anything to hand, doesn't he? He grabs hold of a little kind of, looks like about a 2.5 kilogram weight, and then just pounds on this guy's face. And, I have to say, this is where I think it's probably too much, because even in kind of Tarantino movies and things like that, when it gets particularly violent, they do clever camera work where what's going on, and so your mind's eye is kind of seeing what's happening, but the camera is actually pointing off in the corner of the room or something like that. But here, I mean, it's absolutely front and center, and I can't recall where I've ever seen that to be so graphic before, because he pounds away on this guy's face where he's basically just caved his skull in.
Yeah, and you do actually see, as Keith Jardine, or his Russian character, reels back for the final time, that great cosmetic special effects and that, but his whole eye socket is out. It's like his eyes popped out, his jaw and his cheekbone have absolutely just gone. And I hold my hands up, Dave, as much as I like the violence and that. I was thinking, oh my word, I've never seen anything like that before. I haven't. You might see like a leg break or a shin break in some of these films, a karate when, they take someone out, or a knee or something, but not something like that. That's like, it was almost on like horror film type video nasty, wasn't it? That I agree. Even for me, it was on the border of me going, oh gosh, I can't see that again. So yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. And I think as a pointer for anybody, this is, like say, episode 5. So be warned when you're going to watch it, because it's some of the best, but also the most gruesome violence you're ever going to see.
Yeah, and essentially after that fight, I mean, you're just left with the main guys there, and after having all his heavies kind of dispatched by Frank, he's not going to put up too much of a fight. But essentially, he gets this name, this Nikolai Polesny, who's a Russian businessman. So he's the one who, he's ordered the photos and whatever. So that's the next port of call. He needs to go and catch up with him. And essentially, he ends up letting this guy go, doesn't he? You would have thought he's going to kill him, but he leaves him alone. But you get old John Pilgrim. Again, whenever I hear Pilgrim, it's hard not to think of John Wayne, isn't it?
Yeah.
Howdy, Pilgrim. So yeah, despite Frank letting him go, John catches up with him after and takes out the rest of the Russians and him at the gym. So, they're out the picture now. And I have to say, one of my favorite bits, and I did tweet from the main account a little bit earlier, but as sickening, and I'll use that word intentionally, as that fight scene was with the Russians in the gym, it just had me laughing. That when he comes back to the flat and he meets up with Amy and she asks, how did it go? He's absolutely covered in blood and he just gives the old double thumbs up.
Yeah, that was, what? Yeah, I've got to get, you did actually. I saw it. Yeah, that was a very much, you see it, don't you, now and again in films, and I thought it was brilliant, Dave. I did laugh at that. Yes, I did. Very good. Very good.
And again, it's probably not in perfect taste, quite honestly, because we know what's just gone on before. But the fact that he just takes it all in his stride and he's just like, yep, covered in blood. Some of it's my own, some of it's other people's. But the plan all worked. And, I've got the name that I need that's going to take us to the next step.
Yeah. I think it's great, that, Dave. Very good.
Yeah. Now, a couple of other points from this episode as well. So we have Madani. She goes to Curtis's therapy sessions. And, she's at first, the people are a little bit suspicious of her, because they're all pouring their heart out and she's there and she's a bit of an outsider. But, she's got her own demons as well. And we get Billy, he starts to sort of befriend another veteran at a bar, and again you're kind of thinking, I wonder where this is going. And that was pretty much it for episode 5. So again, I thought another episode where it's got its quiet moments and also some pretty iconic violent fight scenes as well. So I thought this was another strong episode.
Yeah, it was a good one, Dave. Very good one. And we go into episode 6, Nakazat, it's called, and the opening shot is of Frank and Amy, and Amy's dressed up as like a young sort of schoolgirl, isn't she, really?
Yeah.
I wasn't sure whether this was some sort of flashback or flash forward. I couldn't work out what was going on, but basically they were after they got the reel with the pictures on, and they were after a dodgy establishment, and they ended up at what can only be described as it's sort of like a paedophile den, really, Dave, isn't it?
It looks like that, doesn't it? Because I couldn't quite work out what was going on at first, but obviously it looks like something like that. So he's not this person. They just need to use his photo development equipment, don't they?
Yeah.
And so obviously, mind you, why would you even do that now? It's not like the old days, just take digital pictures. But I guess.
Hey, I swear to God, I was going to say, hello, phone, iPhone.
Yeah.
get your computer, get your laptop out, plug it in. Way. I genuinely, I thought, is this some sort of acknowledgement or nod to the comics? Is this happening in the comics? Because I just thought it was nonsense. I was thinking, nobody does that anymore. Who actually develops pictures anymore?
Yeah, well, again, I don't know whether, there's, Heather had mentioned about the Western feel. Again, for me, there's a bit of a 70s and 80s sort of feel to it. So again, and you used to have that kind of thing all the time, didn't you? So, developing, it's a bit more theatrical if you have to develop the photos, isn't it? But yeah, and I don't know. Yeah, possibly. Certainly, you know, would gangsters dealing with the type of pictures that they're talking about, would you want them on your iPhone, you know, sync into the cloud?
Yeah.
So I don't know, but yeah, possibly another one where you just have to park that bit off. But again, you know, Frank, even though it doesn't seem like this photographer is anything to do with the Russians or John Pilgrim, he's a fairly distasteful type, and you know, you get the feeling that if Amy wasn't there, he'd have probably killed him off as well. But he ends up leaving him to live, but then ends up destroying the place. So you know, he can't continue his illicit business.
Yeah, and obviously, we then find out that the photos were to blackmail a senator called David Schultz, who is obviously he's a closeted homosexual. He's been groomed into power by his high. This is when it all takes a realization of why Mr. Pilgrim's there. His highly religious parents, Anderson and Elijah Schultz, and so then Frank gets hold of David Schultz, doesn't he? And says he spares him, like, tell him to get out of the country. But then John tracks him down anyway and kills him. You know, Frank's had a bit of a reprieve on this, and he's getting a bit of a conscience in his old age.
I'm not sure I've got my notes right there.
No,
because he kills the Russian. Does he kill Schultz?
No, it's not.
No, he wouldn't kill Schultz because he's
the guy in the shop, in it, the pedo thing.
Yeah, I think I might have my notes wrong, though, because I was probably thinking he's killed the Russian. He kills the Russian. I don't think he kills the pedo, does he?
No.
Because he's got no connection to the pedo.
The pedo, I like the way you say that. I won't say that last bit at the end. I'll just say I've said about his parents, so we'll go into that Billy posse of veterans. I'll just get rid of that Frank bit. That should have been above, I think, shouldn't it? That should have been, like you say, that was...
Yeah.
So I'll cut it off at the Eliza Schultz bit.
So, yeah, Anderson and Eliza Schultz, they've been the ones pulling the strings. And we didn't mention it, but a little bit earlier, I think there was some dialogue that suggested John's wife, who's obviously, she looks like she's terminally ill, so they've been paying for his wife's treatment. And so I think that's essentially why they've got John to do their bidding kind of thing and go around and take out these people. You know, he's essentially a lapdog, isn't he? You know, a very dangerous one.
Yeah, and then Billy is obviously on his bit of his crusade at the moment. He ends up going into the bar with some more veterans, doesn't he? And he's a bit at ease at first with them. And a bit, he's a bit off with them all, but then soon comes round to their way of thinking. And basically, they're all the same, aren't they? They've all got some sort of PTSD or some sort of, war affliction. And they become a bit of a one-man wrecking crew in the space of a couple of pints, don't they, Dave? And
one-man wrecking crew with six of them or something.
And that was
it's a one-man wrecking crew, all six of them.
well done, Chris, for commenting the podcast. But anyway, the one-man wrecking crew of six, as they go after a tow truck who's towed away, the young lad with the glasses, and he's sort of been in and out of the series, and that was a bit of a stretch, if I'm being honest. And the next minute, these veterans with Billy can actually outrun a truck. I know he's towing a vehicle, but the truck sort of went down the road, turned right, to then turn back on itself to turn back again. I was thinking, well, why have you just gone in a complete circle? So it didn't make any sense, but they did catch up with him, and one of them subsequently starts tying his shoelace in the middle of the road, which the tow truck guy conveniently stopped. Now, the tow truck guy didn't really do anything, but he got an absolute pasting off Billy, didn't he? Billy just absolutely just levered him. And the guy said, "Get off me," and he just absolutely knocked him unconscious, didn't he? He was on the verge of killing him, to be honest, and had to be dragged off.
Yeah, and again, I think if we take that Billy does have amnesia and he doesn't seem to be too much of a bad person, really. You know, his memory is gone. He remembers being in the Marines, but I don't think much more beyond that. He doesn't remember the stuff that happened with Frank at the end of series 1, which left him in the state that he did. But, you know, for me, this has been his journey to remembering who he is. And, you know, he is a fairly brutal character, because you could say when he killed his abuser, you know, and obviously he's not just abused Billy, he'd done it multiple times, no doubt, with other kids. You could argue, you know, okay, I could see that, you know, and in Billy's eyes, he might have deserved it. But this truck driver, he's just doing his job, isn't he? It's just that's you know, car that's parked illegally. He's picked it up. He's not done anything wrong, and you know, absolute disproportionately, Billy just paced him, and you know, you wonder the other guys have to pull him off, don't they? So to speak, they pull him back, I should say. Right in the middle of the road there.
You just beat my comment, but anyway, yeah.
So, but yeah, for me, you know, this is Billy, and he's back, and he's bad, and he's on the psycho train again, and right at the end, and you alluded to this earlier, that, you know, he turns up back at the doctor's. You know, he reads his file, and so she's been saying things that, you know, he's not really happy about. So, you know, he's got a pin down, and, you know, she stabs his hand, and it's another one of those where it just makes me wince a little bit. But I don't know whether there are, he's had something damaged where he's got no pain receptors or something, but he just doesn't react at all, or whether he's just got a high pain tolerance or something like that. But the bit that just sits a bit uncomfortably, you know, so he's got a pin down, it's all looking fairly sinister, and then he just starts kissing her,
like you do,
and then she starts kissing him back. And again, you know, thinking not even 70s with this one, I'm thinking, yeah, okay, I think I've seen this kind of thing in the 50s or something like that, you know, gives the man a slap, and then, you know, he just starts in a very manly way. He just starts kissing the lady, and then she kisses him back, and it's just all like, come on.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. It was very out of place, but you could see it building up. Couldn't you? I think he was trying to build a bit of tension between them, but it wasn't very convincing.
No, and it'll be interesting where her character goes, because there was a weird little scene in one of the earlier episodes, wasn't there, where she's up in an apartment somewhere, and then she opens the curtains, but she's obviously scared of opening the curtains.
Yeah,
and this went on for a couple of minutes, and it's like, all right, what's going on? She got like chronic, you know, raging vertigo or something, or there was something obviously going on there. So she's she's not right, is she?
No, not at all. Now, obviously, we are at the end of the 6 episodes, Dave. So I think we should just go for the review, eh?
Let's go for it. So, Chris, do you want to give us a rundown of our scale, first of all?
I will. Now, Heather, and any of our new listeners out there, because we know we've had quite an influx of new listeners over the last few weeks, what we do is we have a 5-point scale, but it's based on comic book worlds, Heather. So if it's a top of the tree, the best thing you've ever seen, it will be sent to Asgard. If it's just below Asgard and it's really good, but it's just not at the pinnacle, we send it to Atlantis. If it's in the middle and it's not good, it's not bad, it's watchable, but it's something you enjoyed, we send it to the Halls of Justice. Then if we start going down the sort of Rotten Tomato route of it's not very good, we send it then to Hell's Kitchen. And if, Heather, it's the worst thing you've ever seen, or you simply didn't enjoy it and it was the biggest pile of comic book trash you've ever seen, then it goes to the Phantom Zone with General Zod usually. So they're your 5 points for review. So if you could you give your thoughts on these first 6 episodes, please, and what score you would like to give it?
So overall, and I really like my superhero shows to have, like, I like the superpowers, and I kind of like more of the sci-fi thing. And so The Punisher isn't necessarily one of my favorites, and I mentioned that season 1 is objectively good, but not necessarily my thing. But this season 2 I like a lot more. Not the best thing. I'm not going to send it to Asgard. I saved that for like Into the Spider-Verse. So I'm doing season 2, sending it to
Good shout.
Atlantis.
Good shout.
That's where I'm at with Atlantis.
Atlantis.
Yeah.
That's
Was
fair.
that number 4?
Yes, that's
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you, Heather. That's fantastic. Now, Dave, what about yourself?
Well, I'll put on the table right now. So I wouldn't say Punisher is one of my very favorite, not one of my A-listers, but I think he's somewhere up there, maybe in the second tier. I mean, the popularity of the Punisher was huge in the 80s, and I look back and I'm not entirely sure why. I wonder sometimes if it's the influence of, films like Death Wish, Dirty Harry, coming out of the 70s, and having that kind of anti-hero that, instead of having a reoccurring villain that, in the TV shows would come back each week, and in the comics, they just keep coming back, and then the heroes keep carting them off to prison, then they keep escaping and then causing more mischief. The Punisher just deals with them, and there's a finality to it as well. So again, I loved the character in the mid 80s, and I was right there. I shouldn't really have been watching it, but the old Dolph Lundgren film, watched that and absolutely loved that at the time. It'd be interesting if we go back and review that. Also, that so going into this actual series, I think that I got a real 70s TV Hulk kind of feel from it. Heather, I think you're absolutely right. Where when I think about it, it does have that real Western feel. A guy just on the road going from place to place. Or that's what Frank's trying to do, but then he ends up getting sucked back into this world of violence. Now, Chris, you mentioned about at the top of the show about, it not having the greatest of reviews, scoring fairly poorly on Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic and whatever. And I do think for a lot of people that this is going to be a bit too violent. It's going to be a bit too much for them. But I have to say, again, that's not really, if I look at some of the comics like the Punisher Max series, the Garth Ennis stuff, it's not really any more violent than that. And so for me, I think because we've not seen the second half of this series yet, if I was to look at the first 3 episodes, I might be considering an Asgard. I think the second half does lull a little bit. And so for me, I'm going to be consistent with Heather. I'm going to send this one to Atlantis as well.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Now, for me, again, I love pure violence, Heather, and these things. There's nothing wrong with me, trust me, but I just love the more violent, the better. And it absolutely took me in. I've literally been chomping at the bit to watch the rest of the series until we reviewed it, because it's just one of them things where it's got everything that I want in a series. But I do think that there was a couple of annoying characters, especially the psychologist, Billy's psychologist. She was just unnecessary, not really believable. And by the 6th episode, she's not only stabbed him, they now actually love her. So I just find that absolutely atrocious. And it's a formula that it's just, for me, it's like so obvious and blatant that, she was going to be his sanctum to back to normality to a point. There's a dialogue there about, don't go out again. And he's like, well, what are you going to do? And she just goes, don't get caught. And it's like, oh, come on. You know what I mean? It's something like, I'm going to get you arrested or I'll tell the police. It was just not believable. So unfortunately, it's a clean sweep across the board. The first 6 episodes I've really enjoyed, but there's a couple of things that have bugged me. when John Bertram's on screen, Frank Castle, he's amazing. And I think his story arc in this is brilliant. The standout was the shootout at the police station in episode 3. But as we get to episode 6, I've got a sinking feeling we're going to have 2 or 3 episodes. And it's just petered off slightly in the episode 6. So I'm going to send it to Atlantis as well. But I'm hoping it redeems itself with the next 7 episodes after this. And I'm giving it an Asgard at the end once we've reviewed the whole season. But yeah, no, I'm agreeing with both of you two guys.
I'm hopeful. I'm excited to watch the next 6.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. Now, Heather, I want to thank you for coming on today. Myself and Dave absolutely loved your breakdown of Frank and the breakdown of the episodes. Where can everybody get you if they want to, obviously, where will they be able to find your podcast? Where are you on social media, or if they want to drop you an email?
Everyone should check out just the website. It's superpsych.com. And you got blog posts, videos, the podcast is all just kind of on there in one nice little spot. And then on social media, probably the best would be Twitter. I'm talking with people a lot there just where I make most of the connections. So at super_psych.
What myself and Dave will do is when we post up the actual episode, we will link you to everything. So please, guys, get involved, get onto Heather's website, listen to a podcast. It really is a good listen. And the way you break down things is great, to be honest. And thank you so much for coming on today. Anything else you want to say, Dave, before we go?
No. And what was the book you mentioned as well that you can get on Amazon?
So my book that goes over the first season of the different Defenders is search Broken Heroes on Amazon, and it will pop up.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot, Heather. Now,
okay, guys, so just before we go, this episode is also going to be on a radio show each week on a Tuesday, 7 till 8 p.m. on Indie Rocks UK. That's indierocks.co.uk. Myself and Dave not only present this show, we also have some great indie classics that we put together. So please get over there and give it a listen. It's 7 till 8 on a Tuesday evening.
And if you want to get in touch with us, you can get in touch with us on Facebook at Comics in Motion Podcast. You can get us on Twitter at Comics in Motion P. You can email the show at comicsinmotionpodcast@gmail.com. And we'd love you to head over to wherever you get your podcasts from and drop us a 5-star review. And this really helps us grow the show and gets us out to other listeners.
Now, thanks for that, Dave. Now, also, before we go, Dave, what are you going to send us out with today?
So, Chris, I do have to say, I think John Bernthal's portrayal of Frank Castle is the best that we've seen on screen. But I do kind of think, my first exposure, and probably a lot of people's, to Frank Castle on the big screen was old Dolph Lundgren back in the 80s there. And there was a great line, and it was used in the film, and it was also used. There was a band called Biohazard, which did a song called Punishment. They took this line out of there, but essentially, I just love it. And I always think, no matter what actor's playing the Punisher, I always think back to this line. Now, I'm going to do a terrible rendition of it, but you'll have to try and imagine old Dolph Lundgren there sat speaking to God and wondering what his role in life is. And it goes something like, "Come on, God, answer me. For years I'm asking you why. Why are the innocent dead and the guilty alive? Where is justice? Where is punishment? Or have you already answered? Have you already said to the world, here is justice. Here is punishment. Here in me."
What the heck?
A friend of mine betrayed me. I dreamed about the Punisher every night. He thinks that he has the right to judge me.
Castle McGraw.
As an army. People are gonna die. I'm gonna end it. Not the one who dies, kid. I'm the one who does the killing.